I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine, perfect light. I am bad. I sat on the throne, drinking nectar with Allah. I got hot and sent an ice age to Europe to cool my thirst. My oldest daughter is Nefertiti. The tears from my birth pains created the Nile. I am a beautiful woman. I gazed on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert with a packet of goat's meat and a change of clothes. I crossed it in 2 hours. I am a gazelle, so swift you can't catch me. For a birthday present when he was 3, I gave my son Hannibal, an elephant. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My strength flows ever on. My son Noah built the ark, and I stood proudly at the helm. As we sailed on a soft summer day, I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Men intone my loving name, all praises, I am the one who would save. I sewed diamonds in my backyard, my boughs deliver uranium, the filings from my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blue, my nose giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thinned, and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal, it cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird in the sky. Well, look who decided to show up. I'm joking, I'm glad you can make it to the intermission lounge. I gotta, say, first things first, I very much appreciate you coming over here and watching our screening of Nikki Giovanni'S Ego Trippin'. Must be a reason why. Our group, our group. We spent a whole lot of time making this video. I spent a whole lot of time editing, and it took a lot, blood, sweat, and tears, but it's finally done. And I'm glad you were able to see the final product. I very much appreciate it. Now, the main reason we called you over here to the, by the way, when I say we, I mean my good friends Norah and Karthik. They're somewhere over here in the lounge. I'm sure they're chilling, relaxing, maybe having a drink. Not real alcohol, We're not over 21 yet, but we'll get there. Anyway, so the main reason we called you over here is because, we wanted to give you our interpretations of the poem. And there's a lot of ways you can interpret this poem, I'm sure there is. But we specifically wanted to give you our own interpretations, and I guess I'll go first. So, here we go. So what I have as my big idea was, black women can be seen as the heart of modern history, yet their contributions are often overlooked. Thus, through this poem, Giovanni reclaims their stories and brings light to their power. Pretty interesting claim, isn't it? And so, some things that I use to defend this, or I wouldn't say defend, I would say more like evidence. That's a good word, is. So, it's Nikki Giovanni'S usage of I rather than actual names. So, more than being a stylistic choice, Giovanni leaves out names to symbolize the countless numbers of unnamed black women throughout history. I mean, there's a void of black women in the history books. I can't think of any names. And so, by inserting I into nearly every phrase, it's as if Giovanni is reclaiming her ancestry. It's pretty interesting to think about. Another thing. So, if you notice throughout the poem, Giovanni characterizes the main protagonist as this sort of greater-than being, like a sort of godlike figure. And by expanding what we know from Giovanni, using the protagonist as being the representation of all black women throughout history, the meaning of the poem is stretched. Black women are portrayed as the heart of human history, which makes total sense because, we all know that the first humans came from Africa, and therefore, an African woman would have to be the catalyst for humanity and the innovations we have today. And my third and last piece of evidence for my claim. So, there's a quote from the poem, I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine perfect light. So I ask you this. Who created the pyramids? Okay, easy enough. You say, oh, the Egyptians created the pyramids. So it's like, okay, yeah, I'll give you that. But what more specifically? Well, you would say, oh, Egyptian males created the pyramid. And I'll ask you this. Why did you come to that conclusion? You know, we don't necessarily know if dudes or if gals made the Egyptian pyramids. We know Egyptians did, of course, but how are we supposed to know if it was dudes or girls? I mean, it was probably both, to be honest. But how do we know that? And that's the question Giovanni asked, because why do we immediately point and give credit to the men? We don't know for a fact that men created it. I mean, the way we've been taught history, the way we immediately give credit to men rather than women, I mean, that's a pretty major indicator of the misogyny that's intertwined within our history. And I think this idea, expands further than just black women, but all women in general, especially throughout history. And that concludes my evidences for my thesis. And, I hope you're convinced by my interpretation. And, my good friend Norah or Karthik, they'll go next, and depending on how either of them feel, they'll go right now. You'll cut to them.
Hey guys, it's me, Norah. Well, the intermission lounge is great and all, but it's a little loud right now, so I thought I'd go into, the
bathroom
and record this interpretation, and sorry about the voice, I got a little bit of a cold. I think a cough will cough it out.
Hi, my name is Norah, and this is big idea number 1 for Ego Tripping. There Must Be a Reason Why by Nikki Giovanni. So, one of the largest concepts within the poem, one of the largest big ideas, is the idea that the world centers and begins on the abstract concept of black femininity. So we can see this in the first line of the poem. Quote, I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. Giovanni 1-3. So, the Congo is often noted as the heart of humanity, and that's where the first humans were born in a scientific evolutionary sense. And thus, by starting the poem with I, Giovanni connotates herself as the beginning of humanity as a black woman. So I was born in the Congo. I, being a black woman, institutes or almost insinuates that civilization began with black femininity. And that's true as well because, with the idea of humanity starting in the heart of Africa, in Congo, that's not just poetic liberty, but it's also something that she's taking scientific backing of. It's also really important when we look at Giovanni's unique style of capitalization. And so she begins with I being the sole word that is capitalized, contrasting with commonly capitalized words like Congo and Sphinx. So by only capitalizing I, this places emphasis on the self rather than places or things. And so essentially what she does is she centers the entire poem around the idea of I being, as a narrator, a black woman. And then it's important to look at the indentation because Giovanni takes some creative liberties here and she indents it so that each phrase begins with the idea of I. So not only is she putting I at the highest importance by only capitalizing it, but she also centers the entire phrase, starts every phrase with I. She puts I before anything else, putting her as a black woman before anything else. So the structure of the poem actually mirrors its content. The second kind of quote that we see supporting this big idea of the world centering and beginning on black femininity is a quote, I sat on the throne drinking nectar with Allah. So once again, Giovanni in this quote maintains a structure that places her at the head of the narrative. Allah, the Arabic term for God, is important in context because during this period came the rise of the Black Islamic movement. Thus, we see this influence in Giovanni's work when she chooses to use the title of Allah instead of God. Still, it should be noted that Allah isn't even capitalized. Thus, we see Giovanni even prioritizes herself and puts greater emphasis over I than even God. And then it's important to also note this contrast between Allah and nectar. When she says nectar, that's a direct call to ambrosia, or the nectar of the gods. And that's a more Greek allusion, even though we're kind of centering it on the Middle Eastern or Islamic concept of Allah as God. And so by this symbiotic kind of syncretic melding of conditions, that makes this line really important in symbolizing the universality of the sentiment as the idea of a black woman as God, not just limited to Eastern or Western country, but rather it supersedes both. This predates Greek ideology, and it also predates Islam. It's also important to look at this quote in contrast to the last one. So the last one we talked about it at the heart of the Congo. Now we're kind of taking it on a theological point. And so what the narrator essentially does is she maintains the idea of black women being the crux of creation through both the idea of evolution within the idea of the Congo, but also when she places herself in the idea of God, she also maintains the idea of black women being the birth of creationism. So Giovanni is taking both a scientific and theological idea to the idea of black women creating and centering the universe. The next quote is, the tears from my birth pains created the Nile, Giovanni 13:14. So for context, the Nile is the longest river in the world and the center of ancient Egyptian civilization. So here we see the parallel between the act of giving birth and the Nile, as both the Nile and the act of giving birth bring life into the world. But moreover, the banks of the Nile are considered the beginnings of civilization, where the ancient Egyptian societies rose up. So thus, by presenting the narrator as the birther of the Nile, she presents herself as the birther of civilization. It's also important to note that we say the tears created the Nile, and so we're creating this contrast between pain and life. And so the idea is that life requires pain and struggle on the part of women. And so we're seeing that a lot of the ideas that we consider as life are built off of this pain of women, which I think is really important when we're saying even though the world centers and starts with black women, oftentimes the life that they created came with a lot of struggle. And then we see that repetition of this indentation as these lines are all offset and not capitalized because they don't concern the narrator, the self, rather what she created. And oftentimes when we talk about women, we kind of center them on like their achievements rather than as an individual. So by maintaining the indentation with I, she always centers it on women as the individual. And so this is really important because Giovanni prioritizes achievements as secondary to the self. So no matter what a woman does, she will always be first. Thank you.
The big idea is, as part of history, we inherit a collective consciousness from which we can derive pride and power, knowing the strength of those before us. By associating with these impactful historical figures, we tend to uplift ourselves and portray our self-image as important. The first specific detail, the quote is, "My son Noah built new/ark, and I stood proudly at the helm." These lines have a double meaning to them, as they refer to both Noah's Ark and the city of Newark in New Jersey. The city of Newark is significant to the poet because one of her heroes, Amiri Baraka, was a major contributing factor to the development of black poetry and theater in Newark. Her usage of the words "my son" reflects the collective consciousness she feels with other people of her race, especially people who work in a similar field that she does. Specific detail number 2, the quote is, "I gave my son Hannibal an elephant, he gave me Rome for Mother's Day." These lines refer to the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who was known for winning many battles and conquering many territories. While the elephant line is accurate given that Hannibal crossed the Pyrenees Mountains on elephants, the reference to Rome is inaccurate as Hannibal never actually captured Rome. The reference to Rome shows the poet's strength and her depiction of herself as an all-powerful being. She acknowledges the strength of Hannibal and makes her own power known to the readers. Specific detail number 3, the quote is, "My oldest daughter is Nefertiti." These lines establish the poet as a goddess or goddess-like figure, as she is the mother of Nefertiti. Nefertiti was one of the queens of Egypt, said to have descended from divine lineage, so it is understood that the poet is portraying herself as such a divine figure. She forms ties with this historical figure in order to promote her own power as a woman.
Alrighty, well, that ends our little interpretations of Ego Tripping, There Must Be a Reason Why by Nikki Giovanni. I'd like to say, thank you for coming over here to the Intermission Lounge. I hope you've enjoyed your stay, and I hope you come again soon next time. Thank you. Goodbye. Peace out. See you.